Another emergency episode of Panthers Playbook. That's Chris Lea, Dennis Cox here with you. Looks like the Carolina Panthers have their head coach. It's Dave Canales, now formerly the offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Looks like, according to all the big-time insiders across the NFL, Chris, that Dave Canales is the ex-head coach of the Carolina Panthers. By the way, before we dive more into this conversation, leave your thoughts in the comment section here below on 99.9 The Fans YouTube page. But, Chris, you wanted an offensive guy, someone a little bit on the quote-unquote younger side of things. He's only 42 years old. If you wanted that, congratulations, you found your guy.
It's an interesting hire. It felt like towards the end of this hiring cycle, as the Panthers were rumored to be in with him. Ben Johnson kind of seemed like, he was fading away from that. Raheem Morris. But no, yeah. So that was, you heard about these different names. And I remember, yesterday my boss was like, who do you think the Panthers are going to hire? And I was like, honestly, it feels like if it's not Mike Vrabel, it's going to be Dave Canales. Just with, what it seems like David Tepper wants, what he's trying to go after, it checks out. If you look at his success over the last couple of years, you have two quarterbacks in Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield who basically got to the points of their careers where people kind of wrote them off as starting quarterbacks, right? The Seahawks decided to get rid of Russell Wilson. Geno Smith has, he starts in 2022, has a really good year in 2022, got paid. Then he goes to the Bucs. We know that we had Baker Mayfield here in 2022. He was let go. All of a sudden, he's with the Rams. Did okay with the Rams. Comes with the Bucs, and then he has a really good year in 2023. Dave Canales is his OC there, and Baker is probably going to get paid. So the real the reason why he was hired with Bryce Young in mind. So what can he do with Bryce Young?
Oh, yeah.
And it's not going to be a situation like Geno or Baker where people have written off Bryce Young. Maybe they have, but he's only had 1 year under his belt. These guys have been, were in the NFL as starters for a considerable amount of time, and then people are just like, nah, they're not it. And Dave Canales helped revive their career. So we'll see what he could do with the rookie. With somebody who's going into their second year, I should say, with only one bad year under their belt.
So let's take a look back at the history of Dave Canales as a head coach, or not as a head coach, but as a coach in the NFL. It's the first time ever as a head coach, really, at any level, actually. Now, he came up when Pete Carroll, he was actually with Pete Carroll, USC in 2009. He was actually an assistant strength coach. He actually went with Pete Carroll to Seattle in 2010. Was a wide receiver coach all the way from 2010 through 2017, and actually was the quarterbacks coach in Seattle starting in 2018. Also had the title of passing game coordinator for a couple of seasons in there as well. So he's worked with Russell Wilson. He's worked with Geno Smith, like you mentioned, Baker Mayfield. Only the 1 year as a coordinator. Only one. But here's something that actually our friend Tim Donnelly, host of The Drive on 99.9 The Fan, brought up, is that if you look at the offensive coordinators across the NFL, no one has had their job since before 2022 season as an offensive coordinator in the NFL. Like, it turns over that quick because, all right, if it's not working, you bring it in someone else. Or if it's working too good, they usually get picked up as head coaches somewhere. So they're out. So this is one of the reasons why we see the emphasis on offensive coaches, air quotes, as head coaches, because if the offense works, you don't have to worry about bringing in a whole new system every single year. I mean, gosh, Jalen Hurts, even going all the way back to college at Alabama, he's had 8 offensive coordinators in 9 years. What was his best season? The year 2 of Shane Steichen, what year they went to the Super Bowl. Year 2 of an offensive coordinator. Things obviously didn't work out this past year, and that offensive coordinator's already gone. He's going to be on his third, offensive coordinator in 3 years. Nonetheless, that's the reason why you see the emphasis on going after offensive coaches. That way the system doesn't always have to constantly turn over. So that's something to keep in mind. But there's a relationship between Dave Canales and Dan Morgan that goes all the way back to their time in Seattle, because Dan Morgan was in Seattle for a long time as like pro personnel and things along those lines, had a couple of different titles when Dave Canales was an assistant coach. To me, that's important that the two of them have a relationship together and have already had a working relationship together. That's vital in my eyes. Now, is it perfect? I don't know. But the fact that you have that relationship, it's important, because the owner, GM, head coach, quarterback all have to be on the same page. And right now, at least it seems like you've got owner, promoted Dan Morgan. Dan Morgan has the relationship with Dave Canales. Maybe those three things are lining up. Hopefully it lines up with the quarterback as well.
And honestly, when Dan Morgan was named the head coach, the general manager, excuse me, it felt like the best hire after that should have been Dave Canales because of exactly what you just echoed right there. We haven't seen a situation where under David Tepper, as he's been an owner, we haven't seen a situation where the Carolina Panthers have been operating at optimal levels. It does feel like there was some miscommunication there, some things that weren't as smooth between the different levels. When David Tepper first got there, it was a GM that he didn't hire, so that probably didn't work out as well. And then you have Matt Rule, and then all of a sudden you fire that GM, bring in another GM, and so now Matt Rule has to learn how to work with this guy. And does it work? It felt like it maybe kind of worked between them a little bit, but both end up getting fired. You bring in Frank Reich, and we saw everything that happened with that, with you're forcing him to get certain coaches to put on the staff. Those coaches feel like they don't answer to Reich. I answer to Tepper. It only ended up, ruining Reich at the end of the day. As far as a head coach, he's getting paid, so he's not too ruined. And so we saw the outcome of this. So exactly what you're saying, I just wanted to expand on that, just mainly because we need to see what it looks like when those three positions, owner, GM, head coach, are not in alignment. And we haven't seen alignment for the Carolina Panthers under David Tepper. Now that we have alignment, maybe things go better. However, my main issue is this. I don't want to be back here next year talking about a new head coach. And that's not going to be on Dave Canales, in my opinion. That's going to be on David Tepper. Everything that we are going to see as far as how successful Dave Canales is going to be will all depend on David Tepper. Are you going to give Dan Morgan the space and the room to put together the type of roster he needs to? Are you going to step out of things and let Dave Canales run his football team the way he needs to? Hey, if you have a problem, you answer to Dave Canales. Hey, Dave Canales, I'm not going to come suggest plays to you because I'm an owner. I've never played in the NFL. I've never coached in the NFL. I'm just the owner. Let me sit back and let you do your job. Those are the main things I'm worried about, because we see what David Tepper's constant involvement has cost the Carolina Panthers over the last few years, and I don't want to see that happen again. If Dave Canales is fired by this time next year, it won't be his fault.
No,
it will not be his fault. It will be all because of David Tepper.
Now, we know that David Tepper hired a search firm. Sportsology was a search firm that he hired to bring in to figure out who's the general manager, who's the coach, and all that stuff's going to work out. Sportsology is also in charge of putting together what we see now with the San Francisco 49ers. And I think that's something to keep in mind, is that because they brought in John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan at the same time. Now, both those guys are really good at their jobs, and Kyle Shanahan had a really good track record as an offensive coordinator in multiple places before being promoted or being hired as the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers. So something to keep in mind. But nonetheless, the way that they're structuring this team right now is similar to San Francisco. And this is something to keep in mind going forward, is that the Carolina Panthers are also going to hire, as part of their front office restructure, a president of, like, basically president, or I guess executive vice president of football operations, someone that actually is in between David Tepper and Dan Morgan. So in between John Lynch and the ownership group up there, because John Lynch is the president of football operations and general manager over the San Francisco 49ers, having that EVP of football operations, the guy in San Francisco's name is Parag Marath. I actually hope I pronounce his name correctly.
That's the job that basically Cam Newton wants.
Well, kind of, to an extent. But actually what his job is, contracts, salary cap. That's like the numbers guy. So he's that number middleman between David Tepper and Dan Morgan. That's what that position is going to be. So that is a position that the Carolina Panthers are still going to look to fill as part of this restructure, because that's how Sportsology structured things over with the San Francisco 49ers, and they're doing the exact same thing over here with the Carolina Panthers. If there is that buffer between football operations from David Tepper to Dan Morgan, if there's that middleman of like a contracts person, salary cap, that numbers guy, and that lets Dan Morgan and Dave Canales do their job, then good. They need to have that middleman. So there's still one key position that still needs to be filled with this Carolina Panthers teams in terms of their front office. They need to have that salary cap person, and that is something that is part of the restructure is going to happen.
And part of the reason why they are looking for it is because Samir Suleiman, is no longer with the team, and he was the one that basically had that position the last couple of seasons. So it'll be interesting to see what they do to fill that. And maybe is that a Dan Morgan call, right? Like, we saw when Chris Tabor took over, all of a sudden Josh McCown and Deuce Staley are out because maybe there's something with a difference in philosophy that doesn't quite work together. So maybe Suleiman and Dan Morgan already had a difference in philosophy. Maybe this is David Tepper letting him take the reins and saying, hey, let me, put my input on who needs to have this job. Dave Canales as a coach. I was kind of looking back and seeing what was going on with the Bucs. They ended the season off 23rd in total offense in the NFL. So it's not like it's this flashy number. They're not a top 10 offense or anything like that.
Well, based on what? Yards? Because whatever. If it's yards, I'm not too worried.
In total offense. So,
I asked, what's the metric of total offense, though?
So on ESPN, when you look at stats and you look at total offense, that goes based on yards per game. It's also involving points per game, and so it helps to rank you based off of all of those types of things.
Okay.
So total offense, and so but in the postseason though, so far, the best passer, even though that he's no longer playing, is Baker Mayfield, his quarterback. Baker Mayfield, as far as yards are concerned, in this is just yards, 686 yards in this offseason. I'm sorry, in this postseason, for Baker Mayfield. So it looked like an offense that kind of progressively got better during the year. It did feel like, I watched a couple of Bucs games earlier in the season. It didn't feel like they were all together. And then all of a sudden down the stretch, you saw them really start to pull it together. I'm hoping he can do that for the Carolina Panthers. Here's the difference though. The Bucs had Chris Godwin. They had, Mike Evans,
who's a free agent, by the way,
who is a free agent, and they had just better overall personnel. So, and Seattle Seahawks, when he was OC there, better overall personnel. What can he do with the Carolina Panthers with the current personnel? Now, there's still a lot to be done with that, of course. Free agency is coming up. Draft is coming up. The team that we saw on the field won't be the same team on the field, but be a lot of the similar pieces. What can he do with right now is I would call it a bare bones roster. And, that's why I feel like there needs to be some ultimate patience with this guy. He needs at least 2 years before we make a decision on if he's the guy of the future.
For sure. Now you look in terms of break down some of the individual stats. In terms of points per game this year, Tampa Bay, middle of the pack, right there with Seattle and Chicago, 21.2 points per game. That's 18th in the NFL. So again, that's middle of the pack in terms of offense. In terms of rushing offense, you look at yards per rushing attempt, dead last, tied with Jacksonville and New Orleans at 3.6 yards per carry was the rushing attack this year. But in terms of the passing offense, again, there's personnel that we factor into this. Yards per attempt, they were 10th in the NFL at 7.3 yards per attempt, where Carolina dead last in the NFL, 5.5 yards per attempt. So, okay, the passing game was there. The rushing game really wasn't. And I still think that there are some better dudes on the offensive line for Tampa Bay as well. Again, personnel and all that kind of stuff. But also in the back half of their season, their schedule really wasn't that tough for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Yeah. But you know what? Just because just this past season with Tampa Bay, first year as a coordinator, what can he do as a head coach? I don't know. Can you actually guide and make the decisions that we saw sometimes even Frank Reich struggle with, managing timeouts, clock management, all that stuff? Can you handle that? That's something we're just going to find that out in time because he's never been a head coach before. What's he going to do with structuring his staff? Are you bringing back Evero as your defensive coordinator, or are you going to bring in someone else completely different? Who knows? He has to do a good job of assembling his staff and putting things together. And like you said, this roster ain't going to get fixed overnight. It's going to take my guess, honestly, we're going to have to wait till year 3 of Canales before we actually really truly see some winning.
Here's something that, and this is just me kind of wondering out loud to see what happens. I know that with the whole move over at Seattle, Pete Carroll is no longer the head coach. He supposedly is going to work in the front office, but he's also said that he wants to still coach. We know what these special advisors. I don't think the special advisors were probably the issue with the Carolina Panthers, but we had those people. And when I brought up the idea of somebody like Nick Saban coming in just for Bryce's sake, people kind of got on me about it. Like I don't know that Saban is a defensive guy. Knew that, but Bryce had his most success with him at Alabama, so that's the thought. I wonder in this case if maybe if Evero does go, if nobody decides to pick up Pete Carroll because they want to get a lot younger and he's in his 70s. Does Pete Carroll come to the Carolina Panthers to help out Dave Canales, who he gave a shot? I mean, he was a high school coach. They formed a good relationship, and he said, "Hey, come on my staff at USC." He leaves USC, goes to the NFL. He says, "Hey, come on my staff with the Seattle Seahawks." If Pete Carroll doesn't get any big-time coaching opportunities, what's there for him to maybe help out with Canales as he's trying to establish something as a head coach? I think that, to me, that's something to watch. That's something I'm kind of wondering out loud. It might not even happen. It might not even be something that crosses his mind, but maybe those are some of the calls he's making right now. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. I am a little worried, though, because we just got rid of a Seattle Seahawks guy, and we're still trying to bring in that Seahawks thing that they had going on to, I guess, maybe try to recreate what they have, clearly because of Dan Morgan and Dave Canales. I want to see what they can do that's different from the Seahawks. We haven't had a chance to see Dave Canales for too long outside of that organization, just 1 year. So what can he do that's different from them? And what's the good things he can bring in from them? Those are just some of the things I'm wondering out loud.
What's the culture he's going to set? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
Like, you can X and O's me to death. There's tons of people out there that know X's and O's, but guess what? Can you establish a culture that's going to be the right one for this roster, right one for the way the NFL's played today? Can you do that? That's a big question moving forward. That's on him. It's on Dan Morgan as well as the general manager. It's on the two of you guys to find the right personnel. Not only are they talented, but are they right people? Because there's a lot of talented guys out there that might be cancers in a locker room. But guess what? You have to have the right culture in place in order to be able to handle those kinds of guys. And right now, they have zero culture on this team because you keep turning over head coaches every year. So nonetheless, if you actually factor in interim head coaches as well, this is going to be the 7th head coach for David Tepper. The 7th, hopefully lucky 7, year 7 of David Tepper, 7th head coach, maybe lucky 7's first.
And we're talking about just one team.
Just one team. All right. Well,
if we added in the soccer team.
Yeah, well, there's that too. But nonetheless, shout out Charlotte FC. But nonetheless, we'll have to wait and see what Canales does in terms of his staff, what Dan Morgan does in terms of draft, off-season decisions with personnel. Again, Derek Brown needs a contract extension, though he has 1 more year left on his rookie deal. Brian Burns, got to decide what you're going to do with J.C. Horn's 3rd year. I mean, Frankie Louvu, what are you going to do in terms of the draft? Because there's so many decisions that have to be made. And one thing we have to keep in mind, you need like 7 receivers. Nonetheless, we have to wait and see what's going to be done. That's it. We're just going to have to wait and see, and it's not going to get fixed overnight. That's just the kind of way it's going to work, Chris. But nonetheless, leave your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your thoughts. Hey, good hire, bad hire? Are you skeptical? I've said it. I'm going to be skeptical until it works because under David Tepper, it hasn't worked. Simple as that. So I am skeptical, but I want it to work. I think that's the key. I want it to work. A lot of people think that we're so negative that we don't want this to work. We want it to work. We want to be able to go to Bank of America Stadium and see a winning team, cover playoff games, see this team. Gosh, it was just 8 years ago, Chris. Just 8 years ago that the Carolina Panthers were on their way to the Super Bowl. Less than a decade ago. It went from going to the Super Bowl to the worst team in the NFL in 8 years. So I want the former, not the latter.
And just so people know, I'm a Carolina Panthers fan. I grew up a Carolina Panthers fan. My dad was trying to make me a Cowboys fan. I grew up in North Carolina. And when the Panthers came along, I was like, nah, this is in North Carolina. I want that. I'm a fan of this franchise. Mm-hmm. So I want them to do well. I feel like there's a personal stake for me. But the things that I'm talking about are things that I know, not only just as a fan, but as somebody who covers the team and goes to the games and goes to the press conferences and things like that. And you can also feel when you're in a losing locker room what the culture is like. Mm-hmm. And trust me, I've been in that locker room from after that Super Bowl. So I basically have been covering the Panthers since after that Super Bowl to now. And boy, has it been so different since Ron Rivera hasn't been the head coach. It's literally gotten worse and worse and worse every year, and you can feel it. So I'm only reporting on what I know. I only talk about things from the perspective of what I know. And so it does feel bad, and I do hope it gets a lot better. And yeah, you're right. This is wait and see.
Wait and see. Wait and see. But don't wait and see. Hit the notification bell. That way, anytime we pop something up, boom, it's right in there for you. Right here on 99.9 The Fan's YouTube page. And make sure you subscribe as well. We'll keep having episodes for you all as the offseason progresses, because there's still free agency. There's the draft. There's all kinds of different stuff that's going to be happening. We'll see also the decisions that Dave Canales makes regarding the staff. So just keep it locked in here on the Fan's YouTube page. Until next time, y'all be good.